And we welcome you back to the Tuesday Night Tailgate. Week 13, a.k.a. WiVo Week, is wrapped up, and we head into conference championships with chat on all the potential college football playoff teams that you need to know about with some fun, completely unbiased reporting, completely useless reporting along the way tonight. Set sail with us on the gravy boat for a course pointing to Phoenix with your buds Tim and Luke. Tim, happy belated Thanksgiving.
Luke, strong enunciation. How was your Thanksgiving?
It was great. I was back home in Alabama, really enjoyed it, and watched a lot of good football while I was there.
Yeah, same here. I only had to travel 30 minutes, so it was a little bit easier for me. But let's get started. You know, we've been doing this for a couple weeks now, so again, follow us on Twitter, the TNT Pod, or email us tuesdaynighttailgate@gmail.com with any feedback, criticisms, tell us that we're great, things along those lines. So Luke, let's start off the way that we always do and introduce the Tuesday night tailgate drinking game. Feel free to play along at home because every time a certain trigger is met, you will hear this sound. And you can play being at work, not an excuse as far as I'm concerned. So last week the trigger was teams that have repeated as AP poll national champions. There were only 7 teams that have done it since they started it back in the 40s. Luke, I will clarify if there were any triggers that I missed throughout the show. Sometimes I miss one here or there, but for the most part, it's usually pretty clear what the triggers were throughout the podcast. And the only exception to the drinking game, although I will still take a drink, I will not play the air horn sound during any Q&As with guests or any playback videos, audios that we do, just so I do not disrupt those. I'll only disrupt us. So, you ready, Luke?
Yeah, let's go ahead and let's move right into a recap of Rivalry Week and talk about our top 10.
So yeah, let's start with our top 10. This is our top 10 from last week. We both had a unanimous 1-2-3 with Clemson, Alabama, Oklahoma. All won their games on the road this week. We had a tie for 4th with Iowa and Notre Dame. That is sure to be broken with our new top 10 this week, given that Notre Dame lost on the road at Stanford. We had Michigan State, Baylor, North Carolina, Ohio State following that tie at 4. Baylor the only loss of that group. And both of our teams that came in at number 10 last week both lost. You had Oklahoma State at number 10, lost at home to Oklahoma, which is a game that we will be talking about in depth a little bit more later. And Navy losing at Houston, so their New Year's 6 dreams have been shattered with that loss. So Luke, let's start with the new top 10, this week's top 10. Let's start with the top 5. Obviously, Notre Dame, I'm not expecting to be in your top 5 anymore. Do you have Michigan State moving up into that spot instead? What's your current top 5?
Well, here's what I've got, Tim, and I'll say with you here. That number 10 spot for us, it seems like somebody always loses that's in there. But for me, it's very clear that there's 10 of the best teams in football right now to be ranked. There's a very clear-cut line from 10 onwards as far as who actually has a shot at making the playoffs and whose team are good. Of course, we've got a few new teams this week. I'm rocking much of the same as I did last week. I've got Clemson, Alabama, Oklahoma, 1-2-3 once again. I've got Iowa moving up to my number 4 with that Notre Dame loss, and then I've got Michigan State right behind them at number 5. So those two moved up right in form to take over Notre Dame's spot. I like Iowa a little bit better than Michigan State, I guess. I think Michigan State's probably going to beat them in the Big Ten championship game. However, Iowa, number 4 for me. Obviously, whoever wins this game is going to be in.
Yeah, and I have the same exact top 5 in order. I have Clemson, Alabama, Oklahoma in the top 3, just as I did last week. I had Iowa at number 4 last week. I still have Iowa at number 4. And because I had Notre Dame at number 5 and Baylor at number 6 and both lost, Michigan State jumps up naturally from number 7 to number 5. And I agree with you. I think that putting Iowa ahead of Michigan State right now is more so that Michigan State lost to Nebraska. If Michigan State doesn't lose that game, they're ahead of Iowa, and I think clearly in my mind. But at the same time, it's not worth arguing, oh, well, Michigan State should be 4 and Iowa should be 5, because they're playing each other this weekend. So that's going to sort itself out. I think that the committee is going to have the same, if not a substantially similar top 5 when they release their rankings later. But 6 through 10 is a little bit more controversial right now when you look at people's, who's in, who's out of the playoffs in the media. So, Luke, what's your 6 through 10 right now?
Yeah, definitely, Tim. I've got at number 6, I've got Stanford off that really strong win. Yes, they have a couple losses. They beat Notre Dame, but right now I've got to put them ahead of some of the other teams in the poll. I've got Stanford at 6. Ohio State, I've still got them at 7. They had a great win against Michigan. They still have an outside chance if a couple of these top teams lose in their conference championship game. So Stanford 6, Ohio State 7, UNC holds at number 8 for me. Florida State moving into the top 10 at number 9 for me with the way that they beat Florida this weekend. And then I've got Notre Dame falling to number 10. I still think Notre Dame is a better team than, say, Baylor, TCU, Oklahoma State, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and I have those same 5 teams, but I have a slightly different order. I actually have North Carolina at number 6. You know, they keep impressing me every single week, and they're not getting the same respect as some of these other one-loss teams or even some of the two-loss teams. And I get it. They played 2 FCS teams. They lost to South Carolina to start the week, to start the season rather. But they've won 11 straight games, and they've done so impressively in many of those games. I have Ohio State at number 7. I had them at number 9 last week, but I had to move them up. I mean, it was a very impressive win against Michigan. I didn't expect them to come out like that in that particular game, but we'll talk more about that later. I have Stanford at number 8. I think that of those, now we're looking at the 2-loss teams or a group of 5 teams. I think of that batch, Stanford is the clear number 1 of those remaining teams. And then, like you, I have Florida State at number 9. I have Notre Dame at number 10. I have Florida State moving up into the top 10 this week with the impressive win against Florida. I thought that they were going to beat Florida. I didn't think they were going to beat them so handily. And, they're a team that we've just forgotten about in recent weeks because of the losses to Georgia Tech and Clemson. And then I have Notre Dame at number 10. I had them at number 5 last week. I'm not going to drop them out completely because of a heartbreaking loss to Stanford on the road. It's hard to just drop them out of the top 10. They're a good team. They've won some good games this season, so they round out my number 10, my top 10. So if we can get Bernard to show the new TNT top 10.
All right, it should be up.
All right, thanks, Bernard. So this is the new top 10. We have a lot of unanimous here with the unanimous top 5 with Clemson, Alabama, Oklahoma, Iowa, Michigan State. Of note is that Oklahoma doesn't play this week. That's the only one in our top 5 that they are off. Their season is done. They are sitting at home waiting to figure out what bowl game that they're going to, and in all likelihood, it's a semifinal game. So we have one of those famous TNT 3-way ties at number 6, the old 666 there with North Carolina, Ohio State, and Stanford. We both had Ohio State at 7, but as usually happens, we have different bread in the sandwich there. And then Florida State, Notre Dame, the unanimous 9-10. Baylor, Navy, Oklahoma State, all dropping from the rankings this week with losses. Notre Dame's the only team on the top 10 that lost last week and stays on the top 10.
Yeah, and I think that our discrepancy between UNC and Stanford can be explained really by how you view where they should be ranked. UNC's probably put together a little more complete resume this season. Certainly has one loss, but Stanford is playing really hot as of late, and they've got a chance to make a big statement against USC. North Carolina, on the other hand, they've got a big game ahead of them with Clemson. So very close rankings this week. I'm actually surprised at how close they are.
Yeah, if you look at our original top 25, we had, there was one team that you would have ranked 4th, and I'd have ranked 16th. So as the season has come along, we have come together and agreed a little bit more on our top 10s.
Yeah, and it's certainly going to be different come next week as far as how things shake out. It may be different than how the College Football Playoff Committee tonight shakes out. I think you'll see those top 5 in some order. Most likely Clemson. How are they going to view Oklahoma? Are they going to view them as being the only team that has a conference championship at this point? Are they going to put them at number 2? Are they going to move down Alabama a little bit? How are they going to view Iowa and Michigan State? It's all going to shake out, people. It's going to be fun. But Tim, I'm ready to look back to last week in a little more in depth. So why don't you hit me up with some of your sliders or some of your Reubens from last week? And
yeah, I'm the corned beef Reuben guy. And if you've been listening or if you're a new listener, these are the guys that you may have never heard of, but they have played significant roles on their teams and on winning teams on Saturday. And Luke, I went with a little bit of a theme this week. Actually, I have 3 seniors this week on the corned beef Reubens. 2 of them actually 5th-year seniors. So coming in at runner-up number 1 is running back Luke Turner of Rice. Now, a 5-7 Rice team is not going to open a lot of eyes, and Luke Turner's statistics in his final game here are not record-breaking by any means. But before Saturday, Luke's stats on the season: rushing the ball was only 15 carries for 45 yards, 7 catches for 118 yards. But the guy loves touchdowns. He loves scoring. He leads the team with 8 touchdowns, 6 of them on the ground, 2 of them through the air. So he's built like a fullback, and he has the athleticism to catch the ball and run with it. And Coach David Bailiff of Rice, who has been with the program for 9 years, which is a long time given the coaching carousel atmosphere of college football, he's getting good guys at his program. Evidenced by this is the fact that this is the second time I'm giving a Corned Beef Reuben Player of the Week award to a Rice player, with Zach Wright getting it a couple weeks ago. But Coach Bailiff gave Turner the ball 17 times in this game, which is 2 more times than he has gotten the ball the entire season prior to that. And he ran for a season-high 54 yards, 10 more yards than his entire season total. But the real reason he's getting the Corned Beef Reuben this week is not only because he had a better game than he usually does, but he was very emotional after the game. So I want to play that clip.
Yeah, I think we can handle that and do it for you. Here we go.
At Rice University, first off, I just want to say thanks to Coach Bailiff, because that man right there gave me a chance, but no one else wanted to give me a chance. This is my only Division I offer, and I broke my leg my senior year of high school, and everyone sold me off, and that man right there stuck with me. And I'll love him forever for it. He helped me get paid for a great education that I know I use very well. He let me keep playing this game that I love. So I love this university. I love that man back there. And I'll do anything for him. And anything for this university. It's given me an opportunity that I'll never get to compare to anything else. Best academics that I could ask for. Best people in the world. My experience here has been the best. That's all I can say. You.
All right, and certainly good stuff there from Luke Turner, who took advantage. That's what college sports is all about. He took advantage of good education, good opportunity to play some football. Had the best game of his season, if not career, on Saturday, so he is runner-up number 1. Runner-up number 2 goes to center Jack Allen of Michigan State. I've been trying to get an offensive lineman to be a Corned Beef Reuben all season, but I won't even pretend to know enough about offensive lineman statistics to say that he had a fantastic individual game on the line, especially since those stats are not generally made aware, and usually you talk about an offensive line as a unit. But Penn State did not record any tackles for a loss against the Spartans. So at an absolute minimum, Jack Allen did his job by protecting Connor Cook, who came into the game injured, and helping the running game combine for 188 yards. From a career perspective, Allen is a fifth-year senior. He started 35 of his 36 games that he's played at Michigan State, and he's on every single offensive line trophy, the Outland Trophy, the Lombardi Trophy, the Remington Trophy that he could possibly be on, given his career knockdowns of 207.5. Seems like a big number. I don't know what a big number is for career knockdowns, but 207 sounds like a lot. But what makes Jack Allen actually stand out enough to finally give an offensive lineman a Corned Beef Reuben Player of the Week runner-up is that Connor Cook, the quarterback that for the past 3 years he has been snapping the ball to, handed the ball off to Jack Allen this week, and he took advantage. From 9 yards out, used all 296 pounds to run with elusive speed for the touchdown. And I have never, ever seen Mark D'Antonio smile ear to ear during a game, because he is one of the most stoic figures on the college football sidelines. So props to Jack Allen, great career at Michigan State. Awesome run. Love seeing when the big guys can do things like that and show their athleticism. But this week's Corned Beef Reuben Player of the Week winner is wide receiver Devin Cajuste of Stanford. The fifth-year senior, he had to wait a long time before he could start playing for the Cardinal when he was recruited. Redshirted his first year, didn't play freshman year, recorded just 1 catch his sophomore year. But last year is when he really started to shine. And this was actually David Shaw's first recruit at Stanford when David Shaw took over for Jim Harbaugh back in 2011. And 2 days after Shaw took over the program, Cajuste, who was actually recruited as a tight end but wanted to play receiver in college football, asked David Shaw, "Are you going to move me to tight end?" Shaw told Cajuste with conviction, no, and has stuck to his word. Cajuste committed on the spot when he was told that. But in this week, on Saturday against the Irish, Cajuste was the go-to target for Kevin Hogan and was the leading receiver on the team with 5 catches for 125 yards, both of which were season highs, and he had a touchdown in the first quarter that gave Stanford the early lead. But Cajuste had one of the most underrated plays in this game, too, getting open in the middle for, I believe it was a 15-yard pass, but then he ran an extra 10 yards to be able to set up for the field goal, and Christian McCaffrey was able to center the ball for Conrad Ucaprina. They got the game-winning field goal, kept Stanford's chances alive in the college football playoff, so congratulations to Devin Cajuste and the Stanford Cardinal program.
Tim, those are great selections there. I've got my stats here later on. That was a 27-yard pass.
It was a 27-yard pass. But, no, it was a 27-yard pass, but the pass itself went about 15 yards, and Cajuste had to run about 8 or 10 yards extra to be able to set up that field goal.
Exactly right, and that was a key moment. We'll talk some more about that game later on. Moving on to Luke's Sliders of the Week, and I realized that as you were speaking, I kind of have a little bit of a theme going with mine, and that's going to be freshman from Texas. My offensive slider of the week is going to be Chris Warren III, a running back from the Texas Longhorns. Freshman running back, rushed for a Texas freshman record for 276 yards and 4 touchdowns in a 48-45 loss at Texas Tech. The rushing yards ranked number 6 on the Texas all-time single-game rushing records. He broke the freshman record set by Cedric Benson in 2001. He had a 91-yard touchdown, which was the longest in history by a Longhorn freshman and 4th best overall. Also had TD runs of 23, 21, and 8 yards to average 36 yards per touchdown run in the game. Overall, throughout the game, he had 25 rushes, averaging 11 yards per carry, and had 2 receptions for 12 yards to have 288 yards from scrimmage on the day. My defensive slider is going to be Ty Summers, TCU linebacker, another freshman out of San Antonio. And in this game against Baylor, he had 23 tackles, including the stop on Baylor's 4th-and-1 rush in the second overtime that ended the game. 23 stops are the most in a game during Gary Patterson's 15-season tenure as TCU's coach, and it ties the most for a Big 12 player since 2000. Also had 1.5 tackles for loss as he took part in stopping 24.2% of Baylor's offensive plays. That's incredible. The TCU defense held Baylor's to a season low in points and total yards, so very big impact performance. Any guy who gets 23 tackles,
that's a big number.
That's a lot of guys in college football that have started 11, 12 games. That's half of what they'll get in a year. But very, very impressive performance there. My special teams player of the week is going to be Joe Hansley out of Colorado State. He's a senior from Highlands Ranch, Colorado, punt returner, wide receiver. He had 2 punt returns for touchdowns in their 34-31 come from behind win at Fresno State. Total of 3 punt returns, averaging 45 1/3 yards per return. He gave Colorado State a 7-0 lead, 2 3/4 minutes into the game with a 75-yard touchdown, making the first time a Ram returned a punt for a touchdown since his first career punt return touchdown back in 2013 versus Colorado. 42 seconds left in the first half, trailing 24-7, took back another one for 61 yards and a second touchdown of the game. Really great, outstanding player. I think that's 2 weeks in a row that I've had 2 guys with 2 punt return touchdowns. He also added a 3rd touchdown at the 10-minute mark in the 4th quarter with a 24-yard reception that ended up being the game winner to complete that 17-point come-from-behind win. So, impressive performances. As always this week, we like to give these guys some shout-outs. But moving on, while we're still on the subject of food, Tim, a lot of Thanksgiving leftovers for me. As I said earlier, I was back home in Alabama, so I was at my parents' house. I rolled out of bed at 11 o'clock, which in Central Time Zone, that's when the games kick off. So I put the games on the TV and on the tablet, cooked up some bacon and hash browns with ham, onion, and some 3 different kinds of Italian cheese. That lasted me until I watched the Alabama-Auburn game. where I was so nervous I couldn't eat, actually. My mom had cooked food, I think, in the second quarter. She was like, food's ready. I didn't come out of my room until 2 hours later. She had some interesting stuff, some spanakopita, which is like Greek triangles with spinach and feta cheese, some lumpia, which is some kind of egg roll, and the real highlight of the weekend for me, waffles that she made out of leftover Thanksgiving stuffing. So basically putting stuffing with egg, putting them in a waffle iron. They were incredible. Stuffing's my favorite Thanksgiving food, so I really enjoyed those. I know how much you love waffles. And then after the game, I had some more of those and a piece of hazelnut chocolate pie with some vanilla ice cream that was left over from Thanksgiving as well. Very strong day. Thanks to Mom for all the food.
Yeah, and I was at my parents' on Saturday. It's always funny because my mom always wants to get the Christmas tree up right after Thanksgiving because it means that people are home to help her. And I always tell her, we got to be done by noon because that's always when Ohio State's playing Michigan on that Saturday. So we got it all done in the morning. I had some Life cereal for breakfast. Because, I mean, when you go back home, your only choices are Special K, Cheerios, and Life cereal. So I wanted to go bold with some Life cereal.
Wow.
But for lunch, Dad made some Thanksgiving salad sandwiches. So basically just took all the leftovers from Thanksgiving, called it a salad, and put it on bread. It was delicious. I don't know exactly what was in there other than the stuffing, the turkey, and the cranberries, but there was definitely other stuff. I don't know where the crunch came from. I didn't ask. And I had two parties to go to on Saturday night too, because one of them, starting with the Bruns party, high school friend of mine, is engaged to get married soon. So he kind of did and he's out in San Francisco, so he did the East Coast party, his parents did. So I had some ham there, some jalapeno pinwheels, some mini bagel bites, which I thought was really funny. Why would you have bagel bites and then cut them up? How far is this going to go? And then also had some cookies and was pounding some Miller Lights there. Then at the Lombardo party, another buddy of mine that's engaged to get married next October, had some Italian combos. Again, had jalapeno pinwheels because my mom made them and brought them to both parties. Had some Swedish meatballs. And my personal favorite from either party or for the day in general were pretzel sticks wrapped in bacon. Don't know why it's a thing, but it was delicious.
Well, the only way that you can get crazier with that is if you wrap your hot dog in bacon and
put it on a pretzel bun.
And dip it in chocolate.
That too.
Yeah. Strong performance from you there this week, Tim. I like that.
And I didn't get hit by a car, so this was definitely a positive for the season.
I should have teased that. Well, how about we move on and we talk about the media's been hot this week. A lot's been going on. A lot of college football. Tim, what's on your mind?
So this time of year, you're always going to get a couple guys here and there that say, hey, what if we expand to an 8-team playoff? And to those people, I just want to say, stop. The staunchest proponent for this 8-team playoff the past 2 seasons has been TCU head coach Gary Patterson. The first comment that he made back in May 2015, if you're going to an 8-team playoff, you're going to take the conference championship away. And they'll be okay with it because with 8 teams, that's going to make up financially for the championship game anyway. Number one, your conference doesn't have a championship, so don't start making suggestions for all the other conferences that have a championship. Number two, the conference championship game is necessary for the bigger conferences because you look at the games you have this weekend. Alabama and Florida haven't played each other. If Florida wants to get in, they have to beat Alabama. Iowa and Michigan State play. If Iowa wants to get in and say that they have a signature win on the season, they have to beat Michigan State. You look at North Carolina. The only chance that they have of getting to the playoff is facing a team like Clemson and beating them. So they needed this game to get in. So don't say you're going to take away the conference championship, especially with the size of these conferences. You need to have that 13th game for contenders in the playoff. And number three on that May 2015 comment, it's going to be one fewer game for the top teams so that you can have slightly smaller sample size for a larger resulting field. And that really doesn't make any sense. And last week he spoke out about the having an 18 playoff again, saying, I just don't think you can have 5 power conferences. I think you need to take the winner of all 5 and then have an at-large, or you have 3 more. So sorting out the conference champions in every other conference is very simple. You win your conference championship, you're the conference champion. With the Big 12, it's a little murkier, and it was, luckily for them, simple this year. Oklahoma was the only one-loss team. You look at last year, you missed the college football playoff because you don't have a conference championship. And obviously that's the reason why Gary Patterson is calling for an 18 playoff, because that's the only way he's ever going to get into the playoff, apparently. And right now, if we had an 18 playoff with the current standings, the current teams as they are right now, I see 19 teams that I can make a legitimate argument for an 18 playoff. And we'll get into how many we are making a legitimate argument for, but it's not significantly more than 4. And a lot of them we're saying are long shots. So you look at even college basketball, they have 68 teams, and we still argue about 10 to 15 teams that are about 500 and why they got snubbed. Win more games and get in. The current system with 4 teams is perfect. You're getting the absolute best teams in college football, and even with a 4 seed winning last year, you can say that Ohio State was unequivocally the national champion of college football. And obviously it's better than the BCS system because, again, with so many power conferences, you don't want just 2 teams getting in, especially with how many people complain that the SEC got in every year. Well, if you move to 8 teams, Alabama and Ohio State are getting in every year. So then you're going to start complaining about that and how those teams get to go every single year. But really it comes down to this. Last year, I watched a blowout in the Rose Bowl, and I was absolutely riveted by the game. I watched a blowout, and I loved the game. The Ohio State-Alabama game was unbelievable. The Ohio State-Oregon game was a national championship, so no matter what, it's always going to be fun. You're going to add 4 more teams, which means you're going to add 4 more games. It's going to dilute the entire emotions that go into watching this college football playoff and the entire excitement that surrounds the discussion beforehand and the actual games that are played. There are only 3 playoff games. That's fun. Every single one of those is a big-time college football game. So basically, Gary Patterson, go undefeated, get into the top 4. We're not moving to an 18 playoff.
Tim, I have to agree with you and then present a realistic view on it this week in that I agree 4 teams is the way to go. However, it's only a matter of time before we get to a 6-team, before we get to an 8-team. And what's going to cause that? Well, you'd have to look to one year the SEC is going to get left out or one year the Big Ten is going to get left out. And it's going to be one of those 2 conferences that pushes for it and ultimately gets it because simply the matter of there's so much money on the line with the TV deals to be made for these conferences. So I agree with you, though. 4 teams is the way to go. I think it's the right approach to take, and I think it's worked out fine so far. We've only had 1 year of the college football playoffs, and look, the number 4 team got in and won it all. But speaking of a number 4 team, their conference from last year, I'm going to tread into your territory a little bit this week and talk about the Big Ten. And I'm going to talk about a recent coaching change since coaching changes has been all the news all season long. And this week I've settled on Illinois. And we all remember that Illinois became the first school to fire their head coach this season. And it was a week before the season even started when they fired Tim Beckman, and they slotted the interim tag on Bill Cubit. Now, look, Illinois was 6-7 last year. They went 5-6 this year. They're not going to make a bowl game. They don't have a good enough APR. They have an interim athletic director. They have an interim chancellor. And now what they've done a couple days ago when they slotted Bill Cubit to be their next head coach for the next 2 years, they've effectively slotted him in as an interim head coach, just like he's been all season. And he did just fine this season. It's been a tough year in the Big. He held the line from last year. Lost 1 less game, 5-7, 6-7. Okay, they're not going to make a bowl game. But after the administration rehired Cubit on Saturday, I really take issue with what Paul Kowalczyk said, that's their interim athletic director, on the 2-year deal. And he said, and I quote, It's not ideal, but for now, I don't think it'll put a dagger in the heart of the program, end quote. And that's a shame, because this school is not spending money on their program. Their recruiting is suffering as a result. They probably won't even make a bowl game next year. They may not make one the year after that. But to go out there and to announce this head coaching change and say it's not ideal and that it won't kill your program, that's embarrassing. They should have given Cubitt, give him the 5-year deal that everyone gets, a low buyout, be on your way, revisit it in 2 years if you don't make 2 bowls. It seems to me like Illinois didn't even try to hire a coach. It's absolutely unreal. And you look at Illinois in the past and think, yeah, maybe they were good in the early 90s. Yeah, Illinois is a basketball school. Their basketball team's not good either. I get that Illinois has budget cuts all around and their state has a very bad economy right now. But to go out there and say something like this isn't going to kill the program, have a little respect and have some faith in the head coach.
Yeah, and I certainly agree. I don't think this is a bad hire necessarily, but you got to have a little more confidence in a hire and a decision that you're making, because now you're showing the entire university that you're second-guessing your decisions immediately after making them.
Yeah, and look, there's not a lot of big names out there, and you're competing with the Georgias, the Southern Cals,
exactly,
the Virginia Techs. But hey, this is a guy. Bill Cubitt's a perfectly fine person. Yeah, he was at a MAC school 2 years ago and got fired, and now he's the head coach at a Big Ten school. Don't know how that worked out. But to go out there and say something like that, absolutely embarrassing. Well, we're going to move on to the real heart and soul of our broadcast and talk about the playoffs. We're just under a week away until we figure out who's actually going to be who's in and who's out. But, Tim, let's talk about all the hot games from this weekend, starting off with Clemson at South Carolina for the Palmetto Trophy. Now, really not the end-of-the-season statement that you want to make over your rival if you're Clemson over one of what has to honestly be one of the worst Power 5 teams aside from maybe Kansas. But Clemson got the job done over the Cox and Columbia, winning 37-32. And, look, you knew South Carolina was going to be outmatched in this one. Clemson themselves had a really slow start. They went scoreless in the first quarter, fumbling on their first 2 drives, holding a 14-3 halftime edge. They really rode on the hands and feet of Deshaun Watson as they've done all year. He threw for 279 yards and a touchdown. He rushed for 114 and 3 touchdowns. But, Tim, on the heels of 3 turnovers and giving up some really big plays to South Carolina, when I was watching this game, it looked like they were making 20-yard plays left and right. It's looking like Clemson is a lot more beatable every week because we know that North Carolina can make those big plays.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think that a lot of what we talk about with Clemson and why they're so good is a lot of what they did in the middle of the season. You know, you talk about the Notre Dame win. Well, even in the Notre Dame win, you had the lead for most of that game and almost lost it at the end. And then you talk about the Miami just blowout. Name one team that's not in the hunt right now that doesn't have a blowout that it's at least close to on par with that. And that was so long ago. They should have blown out South Carolina. This game shouldn't have been close. Deshaun Watson looked good at sometimes, and he looked bad at sometimes. And with a team like North Carolina that can score a lot more than South Carolina can. I mean, North Carolina can put up 55 points pretty easily against Clemson.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh.
You have to expect that Deshaun Watson is going to have that a good game throughout in order to beat them.
Yeah, it looked a little dicey. Is Clemson going to be number 1 in tonight's playoff poll? You kind of think they're certainly not playing like the number 1 team in the country, but the record, to me, says they are still number 1.
You know, if you look at last year, there was only one undefeated team at this point last year, and that was Florida State. I don't know what the difference is between last year's Florida State team, which was number 3 in a lot of the rankings, and moved up to number 2, rightfully so, being that they were undefeated in the final rankings. But what's the difference between last year's Florida State team and this year's Clemson team? Because they're very similar, same conference, same situation. You know, Heisman Heisman contending quarterback. It just, to me, I don't know if there's a clear-cut number 1. I just don't know if it's Clemson.
That's a very good point, but we're going to move on to the team that they will face next weekend in North Carolina. North Carolina at NC State. UNC won this game 45-34. And honestly, North Carolina's first quarter scoring alone was enough to get them the win here in Raleigh. And we usually talk about the quarterback play for Marquise Williams of North Carolina, but it was really the rushing attack this game that stood out to me, with Elijah Hood and TJ Logan combining each for 220 and 100 yards. Each of them got two touchdowns. And looking ahead to the Clemson game, obviously you know that UNC is going to have to put together 4 quarters of offense because they haven't played a team like Clemson yet. And yeah, UNC runs a hurry up. They looked uncomfortable slowing things down against NC State with a big lead. That being said, Clemson has a much better defense than North Carolina State, so they probably won't have to play with one. And the ACC championship game, to me, aside from the Big Ten, it's what I'm looking forward to the most. What about you, Tim?
Yeah, I agree. I think this is going to be a high-scoring game because I think that you are going to see Deshaun Watson kind of step up in the moment and have a good ACC championship game. And Marquise Williams, I think, is the most underrated quarterback in the country because he's outside of, like you said, in this game it was a lot of the running game. We didn't see a lot of Marquise Williams, but a lot of that has to do with decision-making because this team, they use the hurry-up, but they also use a variety of the option offense. And just in this particular game, the running game was the way to go. You don't always have to go deep to receivers like Ryan Switzer. So I think that North Carolina's, regardless of how good Clemson's defense is, I think North Carolina is going to put up the points to make this a very competitive and very exciting ACC championship Saturday night. I think that Clemson will beat them, but I think North Carolina is at least going to be able to keep this close. And, obviously, like you said, this is their toughest game all year. That's kind of why they haven't been in that top 10 in the committee rankings all season is because they had the loss to South Carolina, who's a terrible team. I mean, we just talked about them with Clemson. And then you had the 2 FCS opponents. And really their conference opponents, they haven't had to play Clemson or Florida State. So they've had the Miamis and the Pittsburghs and the Dukes. But this is their season right here. And, you hope that they can go out there and try to knock off the top team in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. Clemson's only favored, as of tonight, they're only favored by 6 in this one. So we'll see. And of course, a lot has to do with, should UNC win this game, it's going to have a lot to do with where they end up on the college football playoff poll tonight based on if they get the upset, if they get in. They still got an outside chance, but those 2 FCS wins, playing 2 FCS teams, is really going to hurt them when you look at their resume compared to a team like Stanford, compared to a team like Ohio State. But then again, if they beat Clemson, they've beaten the number 1 team in the country, and they've won their conference. So we'll keep an eye on that.
And look at Ohio State last year. Everyone wrote off Ohio State going into that championship game, and all of a sudden they won the conference championship and they got put in. So maybe North Carolina, they need a little bit more help than Ohio State had last year, but maybe they can get some of that similar treatment.
Definitely so, but we're going to move on to the Big 12 here. And our last, aside from the Oklahoma teams, Baylor and TCU. TCU is out of this. For us a couple of weeks ago, Baylor was still in it, but they're out this week. They lost at TCU 28-21 in double overtime. And, Tim, this was a game that was very painful to watch. Struggling offenses, lots of turnovers, and even more rain. It was 14-all at the halftime, and it was the same going into overtime. Really, there's a few stats in this game that are not good. Regulation ended with 16 consecutive scoreless possessions by each team. All around bad stat lines, but really the number one that defines it for me, 22 combined punts for 855 yards. And Tim, weird stat for you there, but this is the first Big 12 conference game with a scoreless half since October 24, 2009, when Colorado and Kansas State and Iowa State and Nebraska each had scoreless second halves. So that was kind of neat. But TCU was already out. But with Baylor losing, they're certainly out of the playoff picture for me.
Yeah, and I agree. I only caught the end of this game, but, I mean, like you said, before the season started, we were expecting this to shatter offensive records. And because of injuries and because of the weather, and, I mean, if this game was played mid-season, imagine how many points are getting scored if you still have Seth Russell out there, if you have Corey Coleman at full strength, if you have Shock Linwood at full strength, you have Jock Doxson and Trevon Boykin at full strength. But, I mean, for Baylor, they were on their third-string quarterback. The statistics that he put up, he was 7 for 24 for 62 yards. He averaged 2.6 yards per completion. That's the lowest average per completion I have ever seen in my life. And even better yet, he ran 15 times for 13 yards for a whopping 0.9 yards per carry. So this is just a game that Baylor, it wasn't the same Baylor team we've seen all year. It wasn't the same TCU team we've seen all year, and it's because of they've just been battered and bruised all year.
Yeah, coming into this, we thought that this was the game that was going to determine the Big 12 championship. Both of us had Baylor and TCU being the top two teams, but last weekend was the game that actually determined it, and that was Bedlam, where Oklahoma went to Stillwater and beat Oklahoma State 58-23. Boomer Sooner. Oklahoma locks up the Big 12. Baker Mayfield, he comes back in this game, had a good game himself, but for me, it seemed like he just returned to hand off that ball to Joe Mixon and Samaje Perine. They each had over 130 yards and 2 touchdowns apiece. Baker ran for 77 and a touchdown himself. Tim, this three-headed monster in the backfield is really going to serve them well in the playoffs because they look unstoppable. But my question is, do they have defensive concerns? Because certainly Oklahoma State, they've used that 2-quarterback system. We've talked about it all year. But with the injury to Mason Rudolph, J.W. Walsh hasn't been passing much this year. If you remember, he was their guy that was always in for the run packages, but he still put up 325 yards in the air on 25 throws. What did you see out of this game? Certainly it was a blowout.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not too worried about the Oklahoma defense compared to how worried I would be against other Big 12 defenses, and I think that's what has made Oklahoma stand out compared to some of these other teams is that obviously Baylor and TCU, you look at them as some of the other top teams in the Big 12. For most of the season, they had a good quarterback, a good running back, and good wide receivers. And Oklahoma State, what they were missing is the defense and the running back. They basically just had an unbelievable passing game, especially with 2 quarterbacks and wide receivers out there like James Washington. But Oklahoma, to me, they really do seem like a complete package, especially on offense. Early in the season, the question mark was, why aren't you using Perine? And we didn't hear who Joe Mixon even was until after the Texas loss, really, when they started using both of them, and both of them were putting up big numbers. And obviously we know about Baker Mayfield. He's put up big numbers all season, really helping this team. The defense doesn't concern me too much depending on who you're playing. I mean, if they're going to be up against, Derrick Henry at Alabama, there's going to be some cause for concern there. If they're up against Iowa, they'll be able to stop the passing game, just put 7 in the box, hopefully stop the run game. So the defense doesn't concern me too much. I think that they have a better defense than you would expect out of a Big 12 team making the playoff. But we'll see.
Yeah, and certainly I think without question, Oklahoma's locked up their spot in the college football playoff. They're the first conference champion. Yes, they don't have a conference championship game to win, but they lost at the right time. They lost early. They locked up with Big 12 getting rid of all those Big 12 implementing tiebreakers this year. Oklahoma, they're in it for me. The only question is, where are they going to be? Is it going to be 1, 2, 3, or 4? So we'll have to wait and see until next week on that.
Yeah, and I agree that they're locked up. If Baylor had beaten TCU, I wouldn't be saying that because I'd be looking at the only year of precedent that we have with the okay, so you have 2 conference champions, but they are the one true champion in the Big 12, so they are absolutely in the playoff.
They certainly are. Now let's move to another conference that's definitely going to get a team in, and it might be one of these teams, Ohio State at Michigan. Ohio State wins 42-13 in Ann Arbor. Big win as Reuben and the Bucks make it 4 straight over the Wolverines, led by Zeke Elliott with 214 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground, complemented by J.T. Barrett, who only threw 15 passes but punched in 3 on the ground himself. Tim, the game was 14-10, Ohio State at the half, but consistent scoring out of the Buckeyes put it away in the 3rd and 4th quarters. Tim, as an Ohio State fan, that had to feel good, even if Ohio State is out of the Big Ten championship.
Yeah, I mean, it felt good, and I didn't have any high expectations whatsoever that a bad Penn State team was going to be able to go to East Lansing and be able to knock off Michigan State. But this is the season every year. I mean, as long as you beat Michigan, I'm happy, man. And I mean, this is the offense that we've been waiting for Ohio State all season. It showed up in the Rutgers game, but I mean, come on, it was Rutgers. This showed up against a supposedly good defense in Michigan, and they just in the second half they embarrassed them. I mean, you had 110,000 people in that stadium to start the game. You had 50,000 at the end of it. They crushed Michigan. It felt good. And it also really felt good to see Zeke Elliott go out there and have a big game. It was the 3rd most rushing yards by an opponent in Michigan Stadium ever. And given, obviously if you heard last week's podcast, and I ripped them apart last week, and it was, you always want to see how these guys are going to react. I 100% thought that they were going to react the opposite way, that they weren't going to show up. Every single one of these players showed up against this game. They got, the seniors getting their 4th pair of gold pants for beating Michigan, as is the tradition at Ohio State. So this was a big win for them. As far as their playoff chances, I'm just kind of sitting back, and I'm not expecting to get into the playoff. I will be perfectly happy with a Rose Bowl against Stanford, or, the talk right now is maybe they'll get a Fiesta or Sugar Bowl against Tom Herman's Houston team if they go to the American Athletic and Ohio State doesn't get the Rose Bowl bid. But right now, their playoff chances, it's like when you cook a pizza in the oven. The pizza's ready, you take it out, you know it's done, you're already cutting up the slices, but you're leaving the oven on because there's a chance you might slide them back in. Ohio State obviously needs complete chaos this weekend. I don't even know what they need. I mean, at an absolute minimum, I think they need Alabama to lose. I think they need Clemson to lose, but it's just not going to happen. But it's been, getting the Michigan win was enough for me, and we'll go from there.
Well, that's where that unequivocally one of the best teams in the country clause may come in should a team like Alabama or Clemson lose. But moving on to one of our other contenders, Michigan State. As you mentioned, Michigan State won big against Penn State. And Michigan State, they rolled into the Big Ten championship here at home. That's their 3rd in 5 seasons. Connor Cook led the way for Sparty, 248 yards, 3 touchdowns. And meanwhile, Penn State's offense, to me, watching this game, they didn't look horrible, but certainly 2 fumbles and 2 interceptions are not going to help your case if you want to knock off one of the top teams in the country. Michigan State, they look very strong to me headed to Indianapolis. They were definitely playing for style points here versus what turned out to just be an atrocious Penn State team. And as you mentioned before, they sealed the deal with a fat guy touchdown.
Yeah, and you don't do that in close games. I mean, he won the Reuben because his team was up big. It's the only time I've ever given the Reuben out to somebody who's won a big game rather than just a 3-point squeaker. But, I've been very critical of Michigan State all season, and I really am taking a 180 on that as well because they definitely outplayed Ohio State in a very sloppy game, in the weather. But this was kind of the exclamation point on their season that started off, with a Week 2 win against Oregon. Kind of had some close calls throughout the season. Maybe they should have lost to Michigan. So there's a lot of those what-ifs throughout the season. And you have the loss to Nebraska, obviously, where they just fell apart. But this is a good team. They got all the momentum going into the Big Ten championship, and that's all you need right now is to have a lot of momentum. And their defense is – even going into the Ohio State game last week, a lot of people were saying this isn't the same defense that Ohio State had to face the first 2 times. They might be better now that I've watched them the last 2 weeks because they got guys like Shalik Calhoun and Joel Heath and Malik McDowell, Demetrius Cox in the backfield. This is a very good defense, and they might give up a garbage touchdown here and there where they shouldn't. But this is a very good team going into the Iowa game. We'll talk about the Big Ten. Well, we have some representatives from SB Nation later on who will talk about this game more in depth. But it is a very good Sparty team. They're going to be a good opponent for Iowa on Saturday.
Well, on to the other side of the Big Ten. Friday game in Lincoln as the Huskers remain the last bump in the road for Iowa's march towards undefeatedness. Nothing really convincing out of the Hawkeyes here. It was 14-10 at the half, and that would double by the end to be a final score of 28-20 Iowa. And that ended on a failed onside kick by Nebraska. And watching this game, Tim, the major highlight for me, and what I wrote down in my notes was quote, Jordan Canzeri is the truth. And he finished the game with 140 yards, 2 touchdowns. He looked really great. On the other side of the ball for Nebraska, really confusing play out of Tommy Armstrong, their quarterback, throwing into the wind, into multi-coverages. And I'll admit, I haven't watched a lot of Nebraska games this year, but I have to say that my feelings go out to Huskers fans who have had to watch him play all year because it has to have been so frustrating to watch a guy that's so athletic and so full of promise make such bad decisions. And really strange stats out of this one. Iowa had 250 yards. Nebraska had 433. Iowa won this game by going 0 for 9 on 3rd down. What did you see, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Jordan Canzeri, and to me, he was the person that stood out to me in this game. when we've talked about Iowa, we started this podcast about halfway through the season, which is right around when Jordan Canzeri got hurt. So whenever we've talked about Iowa, we've talked about this running back by committee. That was never Iowa's plan, because Iowa's plan was Jordan Canzeri. And it appears that he's full health now. I mean, if this game is any indication, in the way that he's gotten more carries with each week as he's gotten healthier. But even if Canzeri's hurt, Akram Wadley and LaShawn Daniels Jr. have been very, very excellent supplements and or backups to Jordan Canzeri, who I guess we just found out on Friday was originally a Villanova signee who Kirk Ferentz stole from Villanova. So maybe I have a little ill will against Jordan Canzeri these days after the fact. But I mean, we know who Iowa is. They're a team that's going to ground and pound 3 yards in a cloud of dust, and on defense, they're going to force turnovers. We know exactly what Iowa is going into this game against Michigan State. If they execute the game plan that they have all season, I mean, I feel like we start this every week with nothing too impressive or nothing of note against Iowa. That's just the team that Iowa is. They're kind of that boring offense/defense that just goes out there and wins games with comfort. If they can execute the game plan that they have all season against, their schedule has been weaker than other contenders, but they've still had to beat very good teams in Northwestern and Wisconsin. We'll see how they can do against a Michigan State team that is clearly the number one team on their schedule this season.
Yeah, absolutely. I was really I guess you could describe them as a real lunch pail kind of a team. Well, we're going to move on to our Independence/Pac-12 chat. And this is really the biggest flip on the podcast for us, is Notre Dame has played their way out of the college football playoffs, and Stanford has made an argument for why the Pac-12 shouldn't be left out in what I really thought was the best game that I've watched all year. It was 21-20 at halftime. Stanford got the ball down 1 with 30 seconds left in the fourth quarter. A couple of runs, a couple of timeouts, a face mask, a 27-yard pass from Hogan, which you mentioned earlier. Hogan had 4 TDs on the day, so on the back of that, they set up Stanford to kick the game-winning 45-yard field goal as time expired. Huge, huge win for the Cardinal as they take on USC in the Pac-12 Conference Championship game next week. Tim, do they have a shot? Does Stanford have a shot at making the college football playoff with what appear to be 2 pretty good losses right now to Northwestern and Oregon? And I'll tell you right now, as far as the ranks go, Stanford's number 7 in this week's college football playoff rankings. Northwestern is in at number 14, and Oregon at number 16. Notre Dame's definitely out. What about Stanford?
Yeah, Notre Dame's definitely out. I mean, especially when you don't have a conference championship, let alone a conference to fall back on with 2 losses. And we've said a lot that a 2-loss champion is going to get into the college football playoff at some point. I think that Stanford is definitely still way behind, as an underdog in that regard right now. They played great in this game. I mean, I agree with you. This is one of the best games of the year. I was watching this at the party that I was at with a lot of Notre Dame fans too, so it was fun to see the excitement with 31 seconds left, and then a little bit of disappointment when the clock hit 0-0-0. I mean, definitely 2 very good teams here, and I think that we're both kind of backtracking a little bit with Stanford and realizing, hey, maybe they do have a shot if they're able to beat USC in this game. So, basically with Stanford, the interesting thing I think with them is, we just saw that they are, they're coming out with the college football rankings right now. We see that they're number 7. We haven't even seen the top 6 yet, but I assume that Ohio State falls into that number 6 spot there. The interesting thing is if there's upsets this weekend, does a conference champion 2-loss Stanford get in over a 1-loss non-conference champion Ohio State? Does a 2-loss Stanford get in over a 2-loss non-conference Alabama, who is coming off of a loss? And even possibly more interesting is, does a 2-loss Stanford get in over a 1-loss conference champion UNC? These are the questions that if we have a lot of upsets, Stanford's going to be right in the middle of them if they can beat USC this weekend.
Absolutely, and certainly it matters when you lose, how you lose. The College Football Playoff Committee says they're going to be looking at your entire body of work throughout the whole season. We'll see. Moving on to the SEC, Florida State, who's out of the college football playoffs. They come in at number 9 in the college football playoff poll this week. They went down to Gainesville and any chance that the Gators had at making the college football playoff wiped away this week, Saturday night. The Seminoles waxed them 27-2. Dalvin Cook ran all over the Gators with 183 yards, 2 touchdowns on 26 carries. And, Tim, the Gators have really been living dangerously. As we've talked about before, they've had close games against Vandy, USC, and Florida Atlantic, and that was just in the past few weeks. They'll take on Alabama in Atlanta next Saturday. Florida gone for you, definitely?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've been talking poorly about Florida, as we've gone along in this podcast, and Trayon Harris is just not a good quarterback. Florida was a good team when they had Will Grier. That was a tougher part of their schedule, too, so it's kind of disappointing that we haven't really gotten to see too much of a test out of Florida other than LSU and Florida State. They lost to both of them. So even if Florida wins, they're not in the same boat as Stanford. The committee doesn't respect them as much as Stanford. There's no way that even if Florida is able to knock off Alabama in the SEC championship that they're getting in.
Yeah, and Florida's dropped down to number 18 in the college football playoff.
Yeah, they're not going up 14 spots for the win.
There's no shot for them, but we'll see. Maybe, gosh, it'd be hard to even put them in the Sugar Bowl at this point. But the team that they'll play next week, Alabama, and this is our last game recap of the week, is Bama won 29-13 at Jordan-Hare versus Auburn. Really big redemption story this week as Adam Griffith went 5 for 5 for 2 years after that kick six. But the real story out of this game was the workhorse performance from Heisman candidate Derrick Henry. He put up his fourth 200-yard game of the year, punched in a late touchdown to get to 271 yards on 46 carries. Tim, that 271 yards was 11 more than Auburn's total yardage of 260. Very nice win out of the Tide to roll into Atlanta.
Yeah, and I think that 271 yards, obviously a lot of yards, but the statistic that really, really stands out to me is 46 carries. That's a lot of carries. I mean, you figure that the average starting running back and the average starting feature running back, so not in the committee, is getting maybe 25 carries a game. 46 carries is a lot of carries, and that shows that Alabama really trusts Derrick Henry going forward. But to me, what will really stand out in the playoff is the passing game, and I think that you guys in Alabama have two very good receivers in Calvin Ridley and Ardarius Stewart. That'll be the key because everyone is going to be whoever they're playing in the playoff has a month to prepare for Derrick Henry, and on one aspect, it doesn't matter because Derrick Henry is just going to run by you anyway. It's going to be hard to stop Derrick Henry. But being able to have some, terrific defense that Alabama has, a scary defense in that, and be able to have at least some playmakers on the other playmakers on offense is really going to help this team going into the playoff. I think that they're going to get past Florida very easily. The 17-point favorites. I don't see Florida even being competitive in this game. So. To me, I think Alabama is basically in, but I'm also saying that as an unbiased fan who has no horse in the race there.
Well, I certainly have a horse in the race, but
exactly
the way that Dalvin Cook was able to put up yards against Florida's defense. Yeah, Florida's got a good defense, but the key for Alabama. Don't make Jake Coker turn the ball over. You don't expect big plays out of him. Just convert it on third down and feed the ball to Derrick Henry. Tim, how many teams are left in the hunt for us?
We have 8 teams, and obviously there are some teams that are more in the hunt than others. Obviously we have, one team that is already in Oklahoma, as we agreed upon. We also agree that either Iowa or Michigan State will definitely get in. So that's 2 spots, according to us, that are already, quote-unquote, locked up. We'll figure out which one's actually the second one that's locked up. And we both agree that North Carolina, Ohio State, and Stanford still have some work to do. So Clemson, Alabama sitting in the driver's seat there. Iowa, Michigan State, we'll find out. Oklahoma's obviously in, and we'll find out about those other 3 teams if one of them can sneak in if there's a crazy weekend.
Well, since we've had such a kind of a short week for game recaps, being so few of them, I figure let's talk a little bit about some of these conference championship games. Stanford at USC in the Pac-12. Again, Stanford coming in at number 7 in the college football playoff poll. If they get some chaos ahead of them, they can play their way in. Stanford's favored by 4.5 versus USC. What do you see out of this one, Tim?
Yeah, and obviously this game is going to revolve around Stanford because USC is obviously out. But tremendous respect for what USC has done since really the chaos that happened with Sarkisian having to step down. I mean, after they lost to Notre Dame halfway through the season, they were 3-3, and they've won 5 out of 6 since, with their only loss being against Oregon. So this is a team that is very deserving to be in the Pac-12 championship. Not a lot of people expect them to get in. It's going to be a tough opponent for Stanford, and I think they're going to give it their all against Stanford. And also props to USC for recognizing exactly what Clay Helton has done for this team and taking that interim sticker off, which, surprises a lot of people given how many coaches would be willing to go to USC. But props to them for recognizing the right guy for USC.
Yeah, it may not have been the popular choice with a lot of the USC alumni. We'll see. This is a very critical hire for their athletic director, Pat Hayden. But I'm looking forward to this game. Hope to see another good game out of Stanford, at least just so that I can watch Christian McCaffrey and Kevin Hogan play again. Moving on to the American Conference, Houston and Temple. Tim, we've talked about Houston most of the year until they dropped that game against Connecticut. We talked about Temple until they lost to Notre Dame. What do you see out of this game with Houston favored by 6.5?
Well, pay attention when Houston has the ball, and it's not just because of Houston's offense, because Temple's defense is still very good too. I think these are clearly the two best teams in a very surprising American Athletic Conference this year. Navy and Memphis also had very good seasons. USF, a kind of under the radar good season. But I love this matchup because the winner 100% should be the New Year's 6 representative out of the G5. So we'll see if the winner of this game is going to be able to play one of those power conference teams in the bowl games.
Yeah, Tim, there's no question that they're going to be, being that the only group of 5 teams in the college football playoff poll this week come in at Houston at number 19, Temple at number 22, and Navy at number 23. Obviously, Navy's not playing in this game, so it's going to be one of these two teams. Moving on to Conference USA, Western versus Southern Miss. Western has one of the most electric offenses. I love watching them play. Who have you got in this one, Tim? Western's favored by a touchdown and 0.5.
Yeah, I mean, Western Kentucky is a very good team. Brandon Doty might be easily a top 5 quarterback in the country, but he's a guy that gets overlooked because he's in the Conference USA. But Western Kentucky is a very good team. Their only losses this season are at Indiana and at LSU, but they also have a win at Vanderbilt. So this is a team that is not afraid to schedule these Power 5 teams. And don't overlook Southern Miss either. Their only losses are at Nebraska, at Marshall, and Week 1 versus Mississippi State. So this should be a good offensive duel. It's a 11 a.m. Central Time Zone start, so there's going to be an early morning duel out there.
Yeah, absolutely, and huge improvement from Southern Miss. As last season they only had 3 wins. The year before that, in 2013, they only had 1. So a lot of props go out to Southern Miss for making it back to the Conference USA Championship. Moving on to the MAC, Bowling Green, Northern Illinois. Bowling Green, another team that runs the fastest offense in the country. They're favored by 12 over NIU. NIU's got some injury concerns to deal with, certainly with losing Drew Hare at the quarterback position. You excited to watch this game, Tim?
I am. I mean, Northern Illinois kind of stole that spot from Toledo, who for most of the season we thought would be in this MAC championship game. This is actually Northern Illinois' 6th consecutive appearance in the MAC championship. They've won 3 of the last 5, a couple of those thanks to Jordan Lynch, just to throw out an old school name for you out there. This is also, interestingly, the 3rd straight season at the MAC championship pits Bowling Green against Northern Illinois. Bowling Green won 47-27 in 2013. Northern Illinois beat Bowling Green last season 51-17. So with the rubber match this season, we're hoping for a closer game than the previous 2 meetings, but this is the class of the MAC right now, and we love some action. These are the best 2 teams there because they keep getting to the championship game. So it should be a fun one to watch, especially on Friday night. It's the only game on.
Absolutely. Friday night game, looking forward to that one. And we love MAC. We love watching MAC football. It's great that we can usually have it on in the background as we do the podcast during MAC conference play. Moving things out west, San Diego State Air Force at San Diego. San Diego's favored by 4. Air Force won their division, didn't look very strong doing it. They backdoored their way in, but hey, they beat Boise State. Tim, any excitement for this game?
No. And to be fair, the Mountain West has been very good over the last couple of years, especially with, Air Force is usually a better team. San Diego State usually a better team than they are this year. San Diego State 9-3 overall, but they have a couple tough losses and a bad loss to South Alabama as well. Air Force is usually very good, but their losses, Michigan State and Navy is included in that. So the win-loss record not necessarily completely indicative, but this is a conference that's usually been very good with teams like Boise State and these teams that really play at high level. But just this season, it's just a down season for them. So I'm not going to rip the Mountain West too much, but this is definitely definitely the least intriguing of the 8 conference championships this weekend. But that doesn't mean I won't have it on one of my 5 TVs.
Well, not so fast, my friend. As far as least intriguing conference championship games, moving to the Sun Belt, who does not have a conference championship game, Arkansas State has already locked up at minimum a share of the title. They play at Texas State on December the 5th. If they win, they're the sole champion. If they lose, Appalachian State and Georgia Southern both have games that they'll be playing in. If they win, they can clinch a share of that title. So we could have a 3-way tie here in the Sun Belt. And looking back at some of the other conferences, we're not going to talk about the SEC championship. We're not going to talk about the ACC championship because we've already previewed those earlier on. We're going to move on to the biggest game, the play-in game for the college football playoffs right now. Tim, Michigan State, Iowa. I know your team's not in it, but you can't not get excited for this game, especially with the way that Iowa has been this underdog all season long.
Yeah, and even you look at last season, there were no true play-in games in the conference championships last season. I mean, obviously, there are teams that need to win, and to them, it's a play-in game. But the Big Ten, this is a great Big Ten championship matchup. I think that these teams will match up very well against each other as well. But I am going to not talk too much about this because I'm very excited for this. So we've had guests on the podcast in previous weeks to be able to give the fans' perspective of their team and their team's playoff chances. But with this big time Big Ten championship game on Saturday, the playoff scenario is pretty simple. Win and you're in. So we reached out to some of the SBNation blog writers for each team to get their takes on the upcoming game, the college football playoff in general, and why we should root for their team on Saturday, because we're trying to get the fan perspective and why we should be rooting for these teams come Saturday. So our first guest on #BigTenChat is Joe Touhey from The Only Colors, the Michigan State Spartans community on SB Nation. We talked to Joe on Sunday night, so Luke, let's play that Q&A back for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll get it going right now.
All right, Joe, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, guys.
So we always like to ask our guests on the podcast what the fan base's reaction to the committee rankings is, given that on a weekly basis there's this dialogue that surrounds them, whether it's vitriol or happiness that a team is ranked pretty high. And after Michigan State's loss to Nebraska back in Week 10, they dropped to number 13, but since then have steadily rise. Back in Week 10, was the fan base kind of overreacting to a low ranking and the drop in ranking, or was there kind of a sense of understanding that if Michigan State wins out, including a win in Columbus, if that's the case, that everything was going to work out fine? What's been the fan base's reaction to the weekly ranking?
Yeah, I mean, I think after the loss, it was sort of pretty well understood that you went out and you control your destiny still. I think that the biggest concern after that game was that traveling to Columbus was going to be a really difficult trip, and nobody in the fan base expected to win that game, and especially not right before the game when we found out Connor Cook wasn't playing. But, yeah, I mean, partially thanks to D'Antonio's kind of bunker mentality, I think that the fan base has sort of followed suit and tried to pay as little attention to sort of national rankings as possible. And I mean, even this week, I'm pretty sure that a big section of the fan base is just thinking, win and you're in. So that's sort of how the fan base is feeling about it.
Yeah, and obviously going into this week, it almost doesn't even matter. We're talking on Sunday night, so the rankings don't come out until Tuesday, and that doesn't matter anymore because at this point it seems like it's whoever wins the Iowa-Michigan State game is 100% going to the college football playoff. What do you think is the key to beating Iowa on Saturday?
I think the key is to find some big plays somewhere. Iowa does a really good job of limiting big plays defensively, and this is an MSU team that has struggled at times to find those plays. We're big in stats at the blog I run, theunicolors.com, and so ISO points per play is a Bill Connolly stat that he uses, and Iowa ranks in the top 25 in basically every phase of the game in that stat, and finding some way to generate some big plays, whether that's in the passing game, we should be back to 100% for the Big Ten championship game, or if it's in the running game, we've been kind of shuffling running backs in the backfield. But yeah, just finding some big plays somewhere and sort of loosening up that Iowa defense to some degree.
Well, certainly understanding that, winning you're in, whether it be Iowa or Michigan State, and Michigan State fans certainly know that everything's on the line with this game, and you do want to take things one game at a time, but what's kind of the feeling around the Sparty fan base right now? Who are they talking about? Who would they like to see in the eventual college football playoffs, assuming that you defeat Iowa and Indianapolis? Who would they like to play against, and who would they like to avoid in at least the first round of the college football playoffs?
Yeah, I think like pretty much any other fan base, we sort of like to avoid Alabama. I think that there's some section of the fan base that would like to ruin Nick Saban's season, given that he left MSU for LSU. It's now been about 15 years since that happened. But you always want to avoid Alabama if you can, right? At least in the first round. So I think that's the main thing there. I honestly don't think that the MSU fan base has given a whole lot of thought to who they would like to play in the playoff. I mean, it's just sort of been a whirlwind over the last few weeks. So avoiding Bama is basically as good as I can get there.
So, Joe, as an Ohio State fan, I've been cursing out Sparty for the past couple seasons, especially with 2 of the last 3 seasons ruining their national championship hopes. So going into this Big Ten championship, why should I root for Michigan State to beat Iowa and to get into the college football playoffs?
Well, and you'll know a little bit more by kickoff of the Big Ten championship, but I think that the only way – there's a small chance that Ohio State can still make the playoff given that dominoes fall correctly. And I think that the best argument that Ohio State would have is something along the lines of 2 of the best 4 teams in the country play in the Big Ten East, and just so happens that Ohio State got the best shot from Michigan State on that one particular Saturday. And if North Carolina were to upset Clemson in the ACC championship game, maybe there's a way that Ohio State can kind of sneak in the back door of the playoff. But you kind of need Michigan State to look as good as possible for that potential scenario.
All right, well, Joe, thanks for taking some time to talk to us today, and I agree with you. I think that's the only way that Ohio State, in the very, 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 very small chances that they have, is to help get the team that they lost to also gets them in the playoffs. But thanks for taking the time today. Obviously, we're looking forward to the Big Ten championship, and good luck against Iowa.
Thanks. Appreciate you guys having me.
All right, thanks, Joe.
All right, and thanks again to Joe Touhey for taking some time to have some #SpartyChat with us. And he actually added, Luke, after the conversation that we had with him, he had a great point that when Michigan State first hired Mark D'Antonio as head coach, D'Antonio mentioned Iowa as the program that he wanted to emulate at Michigan State, being a non-traditional power, but also being able to compete on a year-in and year-out basis. So in that regard, it's going to be an interesting championship matchup. And you can find Joe's work at www.theonlycolors.com and follow him on Twitter at Jobin2E. That's Jobin, the letter 2, or the number 2, rather, wow, E. Also, be sure to follow The Only Colors leading up to Saturday's game and throughout the playoff, because they have some great stuff, and I'm sure it's only going to get better with the national championship hunt.
Absolutely. Joe had some really good points there, and that insight into how D'Antonio wanted to build the program, that was something that I never knew about and thought that was really a really interesting topic to bring up. And who would have thought that they'd be playing Iowa this year?
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we wanted to add that after the fact, because I thought that was a great point. But moving on to our second guest on Big Ten Chat is RossWB from Black Heart Gold Pants, the Iowa Hawkeyes counterpart on SB Nation. whom we talked to last night, Monday night. So, Luke, let's play that one back.
All right.
All right, we have Ross on with us now. So, Ross, thanks for joining us tonight.
You're welcome. Happy to be here.
So, we always like to start these Q&As with our guests talking about the college football rankings because, especially now that it comes out every Tuesday, everyone has opinions every Tuesday on it. So, we always want to get the fan base's reaction to the weekly rankings. And obviously, Iowa has moved up. They're in the top 4 now. What has been Iowa's reaction to the weekly rankings, especially considering that they're number 4 right now and there's 2 one-loss teams ahead of them in Alabama and Oklahoma? Is there kind of disappointment that you're not number 2, or is there just an understanding that, hey, we just want to make the playoffs and go from there?
Yeah, I would say the latter is probably the better reflection of Iowa's, the mindset of Iowa fans. I think there's a lot of just happy to be in the rankings because no one saw this season coming. I mean, certainly no one saw 12-0 coming. So, I mean, the idea that Iowa's ranked and has an excellent, they'll be in the playoffs if they beat Michigan State on Saturday. I mean, could they be higher? I suppose, but I don't think there's a lot of, angst about it because, people understand Iowa has had some fortunate scheduling. They didn't have to play the heavyweights in the East, and we get that. And really, I think as long as they go 13-0, they're going to be in the playoffs, and we'll just kind of see what happens from there.
And yeah, like you said, Iowa has this game Saturday where if they win, they're in, and it's pretty much the same scenario for Michigan State going into the game. And none of the other championships really have that guarantee that the winner gets to go to the playoffs if you have an upset in one of the other ones. Well, what do you think is the key to beating Michigan State on Saturday?
That's a good question. I've just kind of been digging into Michigan State a little bit. Obviously, Iowa didn't play them earlier in the year, so we didn't really get a chance to see how they match up or really preview them at that point. And just looking at them, the 2 things I think are probably going to be big for Iowa are turnovers and the passing game on offense. I know Michigan State's secondary has been probably their weak link on defense. I think some other teams have really targeted them and made some big plays. I think Iowa's probably going to have to do some of that on Saturday. Iowa's had more success running the ball, but I think that's going to be hard against Michigan State's defense. So I think they're going to need Beathard to make some plays in the air. Hopefully, he's had a couple kind of slower games of late, but hopefully being in the dome, nice 70-degree weather, don't need to worry about wind or cold or snow or anything like that. That might help a little bit. And then turnovers, I mean, Iowa and Michigan State are the 2 best teams in the Big Ten when it comes to turnover margin. They've both been fantastic at forcing turnovers and not giving up turnovers of their own. So I think whichever team is able to win that battle and make the other team make mistakes, I think that team's probably going to win the game because these teams look really evenly matched. So if one team is getting short fields or even points off turnovers, then I think that'll be hard for the other team to overcome.
Ross, Luke here. I definitely agree with you with the potential for C.J. Beathard there to hopefully and potentially beat Michigan State. The more I think about it and look into this matchup after this past weekend, the more I like the Hawkeyes' chances. Has there been any kind of reaction from the fan base as to if we do meet Michigan State, who would we want to play in the playoffs, or on the flip side of that, who would they want to avoid, at least in the first round?
Sure. Well, like we mentioned earlier, it kind of looks like Iowa team slotted into that 3 and 4 spot in the playoff rankings. I don't think, even if they win, unless things got really crazy, with Alabama losing or Clemson losing, and if that happens, God knows what the playoff rankings might look like then. But yeah, assuming, the teams that are favorites to win do win, I don't think it's a stretch to say most Iowa fans would much rather see Clemson than Alabama. I mean, Clemson is certainly a very, very good team. I mean, they beat Notre Dame, they beat Florida State. They whooped a lot of teams in the ACC, but,
just in terms of the level of athletes and the level of experience in big games and coaching and everything. Alabama is a pretty imposing opponent to match up with. So, given the choice between those two, I think pretty much every Iowa fan would rather take their chances with Clemson.
So both Luke and I are Villanova alums, and it recently came to both of our attention how many players that Kirk Ferentz has actually stolen from the Villanova program. One of them being Jordan Canzeri, who's been, a great running back for you guys, and he's had all the injuries this season, but especially looking at the last game against Nebraska, he's doing well. So, given that Iowa keeps stealing all of our players from the FCS, why should we root for Iowa against Michigan State on Saturday?
Well, that's a good question. I think Iowa. I root for Iowa just because they are, they're a little bit of they're the underdog in this matchup, and I think as an FCS team, you're probably a little bit more inclined to root for underdogs in general, compared to the, the powerful big FBS programs. And Michigan State probably fits that bill more than Iowa does. They're the ones that, they went to the Cotton Bowl and the Rose Bowl, and Antonio seems to win 11 games every year. So, they're the big dogs, and Iowa just having a tremendous, incredible season, and they're agreeing with some guys who I'm sure could have helped Villanova, but it's fun to see them. Hopefully, fun to see them do well in black and gold too.
All right, well, good answer. Well, Ross, thank you very much for joining us today, and good luck against Sparty.
All right, thank you very much, guys. Have a great week.
All right, and thanks again to RossWB for taking some time for some #HawkeyesChat with us. You can find Ross's work at www.blackheartgoldpants.com, and be sure to follow him on Twitter at RossWB. Follow Blackheart Gold Pants on Twitter at BHGP, and I will surely be checking their site as Iowa's dream season continues. And I wanted to ask them why I should root for both teams. And Luke, I'm not really rooting for either team. I'm just rooting for a great matchup between these two teams and seeing where that takes them.
I am too, Tim. I'm really looking forward to this matchup Saturday night. But, hey, that's going to wrap it up for our conference previews. I'm going to move it on to our feel-good story of the week. And I had to do this week, and it's going to be a shout-out to Frank Beamer. I thought it'd be important to send it to him as he steps out at the end of this season as the 6th winningest coach in college football history. He's served Virginia Tech with class and just absolute stellar guy. And he served there, Tim, since before I was even born in 1987. He took over a program that had only reached 6 bowls in its history at that point in 1987. That program, he's gone in those 29 seasons, he's gone 231, 115, and 2 ties for a winning percentage of .668. And he's taken the Hokies bowling every season since 1993. Earlier in November, when he announced his retirement at the end of the season, the Hokies took a 5-6 record into Charlottesville this weekend to take on the Cavaliers, in-state rival, and they scraped out the 23-20 win to send Coach bowling one last time. I thought it was a fantastic scene, and I just wanted to share it with everyone. And this was the scene in the locker room after the game. As it so much is, doing the dab, so popular these days. But congrats to Frank Beamer, and certainly thanks to the memories. He's really taken that program from the Big East to the ACC, and he's made such an impact on college football.
Yeah, and look, when you make 23 straight bowl games, that means that you haven't been on probation in 23 years either that you've coached there. And I think that's the most staggering part about this is you look at programs like Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, these top programs, and some of them have missed bowl games not because of performance, but because they had a bowl ban. So kudos to Frank Beamer, and kudos to Virginia Tech. I think that they made an absolutely spectacular hire in Justin Fuente, bringing him there.
Agree with you there. He's going to make big waves in the ACC. And to follow up on your point about the bowl bans, this is a guy that took Virginia Tech bowling and avoided bowl bans with Marcus and Mike Vick on the team at some point.
So even more impressive.
I didn't originally plan to say that, but you inspired me there. So. Tim, I'm going to go back to head coaches here. And with these head coach firings, I'm going to talk about the non-firing of Les Miles. I was originally going to talk about the fact that we have too many bowls and that it's ridiculous that 5 and 6 teams could go bowling. But I've just been so incensed about the way that LSU has handled this situation. It was an absolutely shameful job by the administration. And what we saw was on Saturday night, Joe Oliva, their athletic director, he announced that, quote, Les Miles is our football coach and will continue to be our football coach, end quote. And my question for Joe is, until when? Is it until you get Jimbo Fisher? Is it until he doesn't beat Alabama again? Is it until Les Miles isn't Nick Saban again? I mean, a couple of weeks ago, the word leaked out of Baton Rouge that Les Miles was going to be fired. The media ran with it. You saw stories for days straight that it didn't matter how Les did against Texas A&M in their final game. He was going to be fired no matter what. They had 3 straight losses, yes. They lost to Alabama. They lost to Arkansas. They lost to Ole Miss. It blew up with the media. The administration the entire time was absolutely silent. Les Miles was out there in press conferences fielding questions about his job. He had no idea what was going on. They didn't tell him anything. They were silent this entire time. And for LSU, that's an absolute shame. You either fire the guy or you don't. You don't let fires build for over 2 weeks and then come in and say, you know what, we met during the third quarter of the Texas A&M game and decided he was still going to be our coach. To hang him out to dry like that was an absolute disgrace because this is a coach that's bought you a national championship, SEC West championships, and consistent top 10 recruiting classes. Absolutely handled terribly. The fact that he's not Nick Saban should not have put him through the ringer like this, and I was just very upset. And I'm not even an LSU fan. I thought it was the biggest disgrace, at least in the SEC this year.
Yeah, and just quickly on that, this is a team that was number 2 just a couple of weeks ago, and they have the number 1 recruiting class right now. Still. So what is he doing wrong? But I kind of have a similar type of take, but I'm looking at it from the media perspective and how terrible the reporting with this coaching carousel has been in the last couple days and weeks. Now, a few weeks back, I looked at the discrepancies in injury reporting, and I was giving the media a little bit of credit because it's their job to report injuries, whereas coaches want to withhold that. But in regards to this is all the media. The media is just trying to make up every story it can because the coaching carousel is extraordinarily interesting right now. You have a lot of big-name programs out there. USC just filled their spot with an interim guy. You have South Carolina out there. You were looking at Les Miles for a little bit. But just to name a bunch of these stories that have come out in the last week where there's been absolutely no basis or it's just been proven to be an absolute lie in reporting these coaching decisions. The Les Miles story, I mean, a lot of this is the administration, like you said. So, I mean, everything that you said kind of leads into it. But there were times where Les Miles was absolutely going to be fired, and times where Les Miles was absolutely going to be the head coach. I just ignored it all because I didn't even know which one was going to be true. A few weeks back, Tom Herman was going to accept the South Carolina job. Well, it turns out that he was never actually offered it, and now he's staying at Houston. I have seen 4 different reports about Chip Kelly going to USC since noon yesterday, after USC said that Clay Helton was going to be the interim head coach. So, I mean, USC's done. Stop reporting about USC. I don't care. And the whole Chip Kelly thing, okay, Chip Kelly's apparently going to every single college in the country that has a head coach in general. I mean, it's really ridiculous how many of these Chip Kelly rumors have come out. And he has specifically come out and said that he's not even looking. I mean, you look at Jim Harbaugh last year. At least Jim Harbaugh was hinting that he was going to be going back to Michigan. Chip Kelly hasn't given that indication at all. The latest today was Mark Richt was going to go to Maryland, but then I also heard that he was going to Miami, and then I also heard that he was going to South Carolina. So Mark Richt apparently is going to be having a busy season next year, coaching for 3 teams. And then I've heard 3 different coaches named as the North Texas coach, which is not even one of the big coaching gigs out there. It's North Texas. We're talking about 3 coaches going to North Texas. Look, either that's a bold strategy by North Texas or 2 guys are just making up a story. And it even trickles down to the coordinator level because we've been hearing a lot about Charlie Strong lately. You've been hearing a lot about Charlie Strong leaving Texas, going somewhere else. All of that's been untrue or rumor or just trying to make up a story. But even with their offensive coordinator position, apparently the job was offered to Sonny Cumbie of TCU, but that's been false. And then there's just all sorts of these rumors going out there right now. Others that I've heard, Will Muschamp to South Carolina is likely. Butch Davis to Miami is a done deal. But then I hear more stories about other people that are going to Miami, other people that are going to South Carolina. Look, I get that this is a story, and I want it to be a story. I'm very interested in this coaching carousel, but all I'm looking for is a little bit of journalistic integrity. I'm tired of hearing all these false reports and just backing it up with sources or media reports. If you have something, if the coach says something, if the team says something, report it. And I will be very interested to read your article. But if you attach it with sources or reports, I don't care because I just know it's a lie at this point. And it's the biggest coaching carousel that we've seen in years with big-time positions, big-time coaches out there. All I'm looking for is for a little bit of media integrity. And if the last couple of days and weeks are any indication of that, we're not going to get that at all in this.
Yeah, Tim, and I have to tell you, I think the biggest flip out of everything was about a month ago after Alabama beat Georgia. It was Mark Richt is going to be fired, Mark Richt is going to be fired, and that went on for a week or two. He pulled off 3 or 4 wins. Boom, he beats Georgia Tech in the last game of the season. He's fired. Les Miles still has his job. I mean, that's just one of the biggest examples of how wrong everyone is and when they're wrong. And it's just completely escalated by social media now. But, yeah, I agree with you. It's all about getting clicks on the internet, and as a fan, it hurts and it sucks, and especially if you're an Illinois fan.
And look, and I will absolutely click on it if it's a legitimate article about a legitimate, even if it's a rumor, even if it's as long as it's a legitimate rumor. I mean, there were reports today that that Mark Richt was in Miami. He wasn't anywhere near Miami today, apparently. So everyone is reporting something completely different, and it's getting to the point where you don't know who you can even believe. So have a little bit of integrity. Wait till you get an actual fact to report it.
Agreed with you. I'm going to move us on to our pretty good of the week, and this week's going to be a short one. As you can see on the screen there, it's a shout-out for the TCU Showgirls, the dance team, who danced in their white shorts in 38-degree freezing rain all night long with a smile on their face. I had a lot of respect for them. They were obviously cold, but, hey, they were going there. Terrible game to watch, but they stuck it out till the end. So, Tim, let's talk about Week 14 Conference Championships. What are the games you're looking forward to? Obviously, the Big Ten and the ACC are the headliners. What's going on with you this weekend?
Yeah, so I'm at home. I'll be watching the games. Unfortunately, there's not as many games, so the whole 5 TV system kind of gets downgraded to a 3 or 4 TV system. Hashtag first world problems. But I'm looking forward to these primetime conference championship games. You know, you have the Big Ten, the ACC, and the Pac-12 all at once in the primetime slot. SEC is alone in the 4 p.m. slot. And I'm looking the game other than the Power 5 conferences. I'm really looking forward to this American Athletic Conference game because I think it's going to be, like I said before, watch this game when Houston has the ball because Houston has a great defense. Houston has a great offense. Temple has a great defense. So it's going to be really interesting watching just that particular matchup and to see if Greg Ward can keep doing Greg Ward things.
Good points. I'm not sure how much I'm going to get to watch. Definitely going to DVR a lot of them. I will be down in Atlanta for the SEC Championship reporting for that game, so definitely looking forward to that one. But, Tim, we're both struggling as far as upset pick goes. We both lost last week. You had Kansas over Kansas State. I had Marshall over Western Kentucky. I learned not to doubt them. Who have you got this week?
So this week I have South Alabama plus 18 over Appalachian State. The SunBelt's pretty much beaten up on each other all year because really none of them are that good. South Alabama, of all these SunBeltFunBelt underdogs, are the only home team heading into the final weekend. So I'm going to take a flyer. I don't think there's going to be major upsets in the conference championship games, to be perfectly honest. So I'm going to take a flyer on South Alabama this week.
Yeah, a lot of chalk to be picked this week, and if we stick by our rule of always picking an underdog that's favored by 7 or points, as of today, Tuesday, there are only 7 choices amongst the FBS teams that you could pick from. Most of them are plus 17 or more.
Yep.
So I'm gonna go stick with mine. I thought that you were gonna go Northern Illinois at Bowling Green. I'll take Northern Illinois plus 12 in the MAC championship. I know they lost Drew Hare, but hey, as you highlighted earlier, it's the rubber match. Northern Illinois tends to look good late. Bowling Green's electric. My backup plan was to dip down into the FCS to go with Montana plus 12 at North Dakota State.
And it's funny because my number 2 pick that I actually wrote down on my notes was Northern Illinois over Bowling Green, but Bowling Green has just been lights out in the MAC lately, so I couldn't pull the trigger on it.
I'm gonna take my flyer on it, so we'll see how that goes. But Tim, drinking game this week, I've got a good guess. How much did you have to drink this week?
A couple. I mean, I had mostly side ones because this was kind of a lesser category this week compared to others. You know, now that there's not as many teams that get talked about, it's harder to do a team category. But I think that this week's is fairly easy. So,
absolutely.
All 6 got mentioned. All 6 of the triggers got mentioned. I think you're going to get this pretty easily, Luke.
Yeah, you mentioned Christian McCaffrey, Deshaun Watson, Baker Mayfield, Derrick Henry, Zeke Elliott, Christian McCaffrey. If you had thrown in Keenan Reynolds in there as well, certainly our leading Heisman candidates right now.
Yes, and the only reason that Keenan Reynolds was not thrown in there was these are the only players, the only 6 players that are listed on sportsbook.ag as Heisman contenders. So Derrick Henry right now listed as 1-6 odds, Deshaun Watson at 9-2, Christian McCaffrey at 8-1, Ezekiel Elliott at 12-1, Dalvin Cook at 15-1, and Baker Mayfield at 25-1. And this is a nice lead-in that next week's podcast we will be voting for our Heisman ballots next week, so stay tuned to that.
Absolutely, and I don't know if anyone follows this as far as the Heisman fan vote goes. Keenan Reynolds mysteriously pulled off it today, despite being the leader earlier in the week. Certainly with their loss, doesn't really stand much a chance, but he has had a great season. Tim, I've got nothing left this week. I'm very excited for conference championship games. I certainly want to thank the listeners for listening. As always, they can always contact us on Twitter at @TNTPod or by email at TuesdayNightTailgate@gmail.com. Thanks again for Joe and Ross for appearing this week. Had great Big Ten championship chat. Any final words from you, Tim?
No, not really. Just looking forward to some good games this week, Big Ten championship in particular.
All right, everybody. That's going to wrap it up for us. Happy belated Thanksgiving, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.